Alright, so Dragon's Dogma 2. There's been a lot of discourse about this one, and there's a lot of people very mad about the MTX to begin with, and I think that gets very distracting because there's a lot to talk about with this game, and I think there are some things to genuinely criticize. Even as somebody who adores it, was super hyped for it, super excited for it, loves Dragon's Dogma 1, played the heck out of that, played it on the Switch again, so I played it multiple times, and approached it in multiple ways. I think Dragon's Dogma 2 is a lot of things. I can understand the discourse around it being as variable as it is. If you like Dragon's Dogma 1, you're probably going to like Dragon's Dogma 2. If you like a game that has some decent RPG elements where your class really matters and influences like what you're going to do in the world, you're going to have a great time. If you like fighting big elite enemies and hurling yourself through the air and having your companions actually, matter in that choice, influence how your gameplay is going to go, you're going to enjoy yourself. It's a pretty cool game. But if you're going in expecting it to be as good as Dragon's Dogma 1 with its full DLC, like the Dark Arisen patch with Bitter Black Isle, I think you're going to leave a little disappointed because this one is missing some of that end game content. It's missing some of that really challenging, those really hard fights. I felt like the only time the game really felt kind of hard was maybe early mid-game when I would tackle an enemy that was a bit out of my league. Like this current fight where I'm fighting the Griffin or I'm fighting Drakes later. They could put me at risk of not really losing, but just taking a long time to beat them. The Drake could kill me because I wasn't able to stagger lock it with my fighter early on. I did start as a mage, so I had fun with that. But I have a lot of experience now. I've put about 70 hours into the game, which I think is more than fair enough. Also, it is fun to ride the Griffin and actually take off and realize you can stand on its back to recover some stamina. I was worried I was going to fall off there. But there are really cool moments like this. And in a game where you can't fast travel very easily, being willing to do this and have a bit of an adventure and just like ride an enemy for a while, it is a really cool experience. The problem, of course, is some of the tedium with those annoying choices ends up being, tedium as opposed to being a fun and awesome epic adventure time, just because the way the game is kind of structured and what you end up finding around you. But I think it is a beautiful game. I think the combat is awesome. I think the amount of things you can do are awesome. But let's get a little bit more into how I felt the progression went from early to mid to late game, because I think that's going to matter to a lot of people. Early game, I think the game has a really great balance to it. Everything feels vast, there's a lot to see, and granted, you're going to want to do a lot of that stuff early on. Every class has its distinct weaknesses and strengths, and if you toy around with that a bit, you're getting new skills. It's really cool to see just how much you can do. You have minimal quest interaction at first, which I think is actually pretty important. You're not dealing with lengthy quests or huge fetch quests. It's pretty clear there's some cool things going on, like you're made to encounter an ogre early on as part of the main quest. It feels like it's got a good balance of how to get you in and out of the action, and it feels reasonable. Like you're going back to town pretty quickly, you get to a new town pretty quickly, and there's not like a million quests in each area, and the things you can have happen in those quests feel sensible, like you might be approaching your first few elites. For example, one thing I had to do was escort two brothers, and I ended up running into an ogre on my first ogre fight as a mage in the middle of the night with those two brothers I was worried were going to die in the fight. But we managed to clutch it out, and it was a super cool kill, and it was just really fun. There's a lot of things in the wild to find, too. You've got your seeker tokens and gold beetles. Seeker tokens are a currency that you find hidden, they're purposely hidden, sometimes annoyingly so, but I'll get to that later. But you can turn those in for pretty good rewards. I do feel like the rewards get kind of hollow after a certain point, but it's worth it at first, and it is nice to just keep your eye out for them. It's something to get. There's a lot of materials you're going to want because most things you're going to upgrade are going to require, some monster materials, maybe some ore, and you're going to find those things out in the wild. There is a lot of monster, well, abundance. You will find lots of goblins and lots of creatures roaming around, and I feel like it's a pretty good setup. I do think some areas get a little bit over the top with how dense the monsters are, instead of, especially in Bakbatul, I think it's pronounced, the desert area, or the area with a lot of plateaus. I guess it's more arid. It's not really a desert. But that one is like every 5 steps you have a bunch of like harpies, a bunch of goblins and hobgoblins. And people, I thought, were exaggerating when they said that. But when I went back there recently, it really is true. If you're trying to do anything but fight every single pack, it is pretty miserable. Like, you're going to be surrounded by these things constantly. And they're not challenging, they're just annoying. So I felt like that was a little bit of a letdown with those. What is lacking in the early game and in a lot of the adventuring is finding lots of cool gear. I don't feel like I found weapons or gear that was like, wow, this is super unique, or this complements a build. I did find some cool pieces. Like, I do like this fighter set that I have going on at this point in the game. I think it looks pretty. It is fun. But I do think that, I think I just bought that piece. I don't remember if I found it or not. I know you can buy it. But most gear you're finding is going to be okay, but your best stuff is going to come from the store. Like, just from any, and I don't mean like an MTX store, I just mean like just random merchants you're meeting in the cities. You're not finding like really awesome enchanted weapons everywhere. Once in a while you do, and I do appreciate that. Like, there are some like permanently frozen swords, or permanently fire-based like two-handed weapons, or like a staff that has light affinity, which you can't get anywhere like any other way. Like, you can't cast an elemental affinity for that, which is useful for like one enemy, which I still have yet to encounter, the Dullaheim. So there are some things like that. It's just that I think the game really needed more and more armor pieces that did something unique, or maybe augmented something about your class. I do think that is a missing aspect for the game. But I think early game, you're just going to be having a cool time fighting all these new monsters, seeing what their mechanics are like, and you won't be completely clowning on them early on. It's unlikely you're just completely stagger locking them. I didn't play Warrior early game, so maybe it's a little bit different there, but I felt like I had a good balance as mage and fighter and thief early game. Whenever I encountered something new or something big, I had to be a little clever. If this changes a little bit later game, where you can just clown on things a bit too easily, but I'll get more into that a little bit later. There are really cool encounters there, though. Like, you just saw a Minotaur and Griffin encounter. I have a really nice encounter that I had that I really enjoyed, which I wish I had more of. This was a nice mid-game encounter, and with that, let's talk a little bit about how things start to change the mid-game in just a moment. Before I get there, though, I do want to say every class has something cool they can do, and you're going to have things you wish you could do when you're a different class. Some classes feel better than others, though, in terms of what they really have the opportunity to do as they go through it. And this can be a bit detrimental in a way. I think this would be mitigated if the pawns were better at following certain instructions. For example, if you could get your pawn to just use High Levin, which is the like the thunder strikes, or sorry, I should say lightning strikes, that actually zap enemies that are at range, especially harpies, or if you could get your ranger to shoot things specifically, I think that would help a lot, because then you wouldn't need to feel like, oh, I wish I was the bow user, or I should be warfarer, just so I can swap to everyone's different weapons and solve the problem that shouldn't be a problem. I do think the warfarer is great, but only because it solves that exploration issue. But it doesn't feel as good to be a warfarer if, for example, you want to be a warrior, because the warrior has certain stats, like a high stack resist, that the warfarer simply doesn't get. So you will have kind of a scuffed version of that, just so you can have some traversal options that really shouldn't be a problem. And again, if I could make my own pawn, who I had be a warrior most of the time, if I could just make him use his springboard attack, which just launches you into the air really high up, and have him do it whenever I wanted him to, as opposed to whenever he realized there's a spot where he could use it. I would have a really easy time of, not worrying about it. I could just have him launch me and, no problem. There is an item you can use to help with traversal things like that, a harpy lure, which, you might not know because it doesn't really tell you why you would want to use it when you first get your hands on one or two of those. But what it does is it summons some harpies, which you can just grab, and they will kind of fly you at, around a little bit. You can kind of guide them. But that's really frustrating, and you're not going to have as many of them as you need to get things like certain secret tokens or chests. Meanwhile, Mage or Sorcerer or Mystic Spearhand all have a horizontal movement skill, which you can use to basically get to locations that you can't otherwise. Even Mage gets you a little bit of height. What is really frustrating about that in particular is that something like Thief, who you would think would be the more acrobatic one, only has a wall jump, which doesn't always work well if the wall is not like a flat one. So you can't always get that to work, so it's not as good. Basically, if pawns could be a little bit better controlled for certain situations, you'd have a good time. Now, I think the best encounters of the games are ones like this, where you have two elites colliding and creating a kind of unique fight, where there's some challenges, like you see my thief over there getting crushed in the hands of a golem, but you also saw that the golem did this range attack which completely beat up the griffin. Now, I was early mid-game here, so I wasn't terribly strong. I wasn't able to just knock out the griffin super quick or do anything to completely, mitigate its abilities. So what was kind of interesting here was I was able to use the griffin as a sort of shield and make it eat tons of damage I wasn't able to do on my own by just positioning myself behind it. So there was something tactical I could do here. Now, because I also remember Dragon's Dogma 1, I knew how to beat a golem and that it wouldn't be too hard. I just have to climb on it and stab its sigils. But I thought this was a really unique encounter, and I wish there was more encounters where they would purposely put multiple elites together. There are a few areas that have that, but I think they needed to have more, and they needed to have more tactics employed by the NPCs to make it something more interesting. Where things get really good mid-game are there when you're fighting those harder elites, because you're still not so strong that everything is just meaningless. You really care about what skills you have. You might be using some items. You might actually have to use a wake stone or two. And with harder encounters like this, you really do feel like, okay, I got to get creative with what I'm doing. I got to use my pawns the best I can. You feel like those debilitations more. Late game, I haven't had an encounter like this in a while. Now that, of course, the better you get at playing, the more you understand the game, the more that really changes. So obviously that is, not entirely the fault of the game. I just think they could have done something to maybe scale the world to you better, have more elites, or do something interesting with quests. And this is where I think things get really bad, is the questing. The political intrigue, big city quests are just terrible. Some of them are just really poor, and while there are a few standout quests and some characters that I'm kind of like, okay, they're all right, at least they have something of a personality, I feel like most of them are very lackluster because they don't capitalize on what is good about the game, which is the combat and the running around. And there's just so many oddities that go on with these political intrigue quests, and there's no real good systems for them, so it just ends up feeling pretty bad. The only quest that I can really say that I thought was really good was one of the early ones where they force you to kind of run into the ogre. I think it's cool to have, or not the ogre, the Cyclops. I think it's cool to have a moment where you're forced to fight an elite. That's sensible and what, plays well with the game. And the Sphinx quest, which is focused on riddles and weird, uses of the game's strange systems, which works because, again, the game is sort of designed with those weird systems, and using them makes sense. For example, picking up an NPC and then using your limited fairy stones, which are your fast travel items, in order to bring an NPC over to a very fragile pot instead of trekking across 3/4 the map carrying this pot that will break if anything touches it, is a good solution to a puzzle, and it uses the weird systems of the game in a good way. Having to identify an NPC that looks slightly different from another, again, that's a cool thing. It's part of the Sphinx quest. And the Sphinx quest also culminates in fighting the Sphinx, which is a unique enemy you don't get to encounter again. And even beating it is a unique puzzle. Some people say you have to use the arrow of unmaking it gives you, which is like that Zelda one-shot arrow that just insta-kill things. You actually don't. If you pay attention to that aforementioned vase that's really fragile, it has a picture that shows the face and the bust of the Sphinx in a light pattern. And then it shows scars and scratches all over the bestial parts of the Sphinx, which is supposed to be telling you don't attack the human face and body, attack the back part, and that's how you can win. And that's true. If you do that, the Sphinx doesn't fly away and you're able to just beat it in an outright fight. That said, I couldn't tell you much about the Sphinx's actual moveset, aside from the fact that it teleported, because I beat the crap out of it so quickly, and you only fight one, so I didn't really see a lot other than I could teleport and cast some spells, which is, again, a little bit of a problem with once you get to the end game. I think the quests, the real issues I had with them is just so many of them were fetch quests, like, please go get this random item that is, you know, a 20-30 minute walk away. Or go back and forth between these two towns, which you've already gone back and forth between quite a few times, and fight the same respawning packs of enemies with maybe, you know, the occasional elite that's there sometimes and not there other times. Now, I don't mind that the quests weren't perfect. Dragon's Dogma 1 didn't have perfect quests, but there just weren't enough big elite fights and really cool set pieces that were set up with ease. If there were some cool fights, like with a political intrigue thing, like, oh, 20 guards come after you and you actually are supposed to beat them, or, you know, a really strong warrior who is, you know, like, let's say the fake Arisen, who has command of pawns, fights you, and it's like a little mini battle versus another, you know, group. That could have been cool. Making use of like a Coliseum type thing where it's like, okay, now you have to take out the fake Arisen guy, and he's got his pawns, you've got yours, and, you know, you've got to fight these, like, his setup, and that could be kind of cool. It would play with the actual systems of the game, and it would make sense, and it would give you something to look forward to, a very RPG adventure encounter. Instead, I feel like all the cool things just kind of happened at random out in the wild, which isn't bad, but it just made me really annoyed when I would spend like an hour, 2 hours questing through the city. The main city, Vermund, the one you go to, like the first big city, I legitimately spent, and I remember one of my recordings was about 2 hours of me just running around, turning in, fetching, like doing fetch quests, waiting for time to pass for certain things to happen, because you just had to knock them out. And it wasn't really that great. One quest I remember too that I came across was, which sounded interesting, was an elf got abducted. And she got abducted by, I think it's the ogre or troll enemy, which specifically goes after women. Like, you know, if you're a female main character, it will try to grab you and squish the life out of you. And it just frenzies and goes after women first, which is like a cool design. Like, it makes it so that tactics change. I was like, oh, we have to save this elf woman. That's going to be cool. And I have to fight this thing. They'll probably do something interesting with it. Like, I'll have to protect her during the fight. That's at least something added to the battle. But no, when you get there, you get this janky ass like little quest thing where the guy who's traveling with you is like, oh, I'll shoot the arm, run in, grab her, and run out. While grabbing and picking up anyone is a, you know, mechanic that is in the game, which is okay. It really isn't that interesting to just be like, okay, I just run in, grab the enemy, grab the girl, run out, and I don't even have to kill the troll. I went back myself and killed the troll, but nothing, you know, no one said anything about that. And I'm sure I probably could have just killed the troll and it probably would have quest completed. But the other problem this game has is there is no saving. So was I really going to risk failing the quest, have it save immediately after, or have to go back a ton of time to my last in save just to experiment with that? No, because that does provide a real risk. Now, while I think that's a cool mechanic in of its own right, you know, making you have to think, okay, I have one save file. If I mess up or do something stupid, it's going to cost me. I don't think it is particularly great for, you know, exploring moments like that. Instead, you realize, oh, I just run in, grab the thing, and run away, which, again, pretty lackluster when you're this big shot adventurer, so to speak. Other janky things with NPCs that I had a really bad time with, that I know not everybody did, but I'm going to show the clips of it because I think it's worth seeing, because I thought I was doing the right thing here, is the way the disguise slash stealth system works. A lot of people were talking about this. I'm sure people will come out with more official things on it. But there's one section, like this palace, where they want you to wear noble's attire to be able to walk in. They don't use this mechanic in a lot of other places, like where you have to disguise yourself. But in this one, I had to, which was just a little bit annoying. So to enter the courtyard, they want you to dress like a noble. You can also wear guard armor, and apparently that makes it so nobody bothers you at all. I only got bothered once with this, and then the rest of the times I was freely able to loot, run around, be a menace in this place, and nothing bad happened to me. So I really don't understand what happened here, but I'm going to show it to you because I have video proof of it. You can see this is a pretty early game because I'm level 12, and I'm also carrying way too much stuff. So I went into the jail part of this, which I was supposed to do as part of a quest, and a guard lets you in. I'm dressed in my noble's clothes, so I figure, okay, this makes sense. And, you know, why would I be in trouble for going to the jail? Like, no one stops you. Nobody says, like, hey, get out of here. And in fact, I walked past a guard pretty early on here. I think it happens right here. I'm just, you know, minding my own business. I figured I'm doing the right thing. I'm looking at the quests that I'm doing right there. Like, oh, I'm going to find the magistrate. I happen to be in the area. I'm like, I might as well do this while I can. So I run forward. There's a guard that's patrolling around the area. Yeah, like right there. You see, I walk right past him. I literally do the greet emote to him because I was like, oh, maybe I'll get in trouble. So I raise my hand. He's all happy. Everything's good. Then he randomly comes in and kicks me in the back of the head. I'm like, okay, I'm a mage with nothing. He didn't say anything. I just opened this chest. No one has ever gotten mad about me running into their house and opening chests before. So I was like, that doesn't seem like it should be a problem. So he's trying to kill me. Now, as a mage, by myself, with no pawns, I am horribly at a disadvantage. So I'm like, should I even try to fight? Should I try to kill the NPC? Is it worth it? I get swarmed. Of course, I'm pretty low level, so these guys just beat the crap out of me. I think I get this one spell off, and it doesn't really do much damage, which is just pretty disappointing. I figured this is kind of like a Witcher 3 moment, where it's like, okay, the guards are probably supposed to be super powerful. So, okay, I'll try to leave. And then I get swarmed by more guys. You can see I just get butchered here. No chance. I get thrown in prison. I'm like, oh, great. Like, I hope I didn't brick my save. I see I can escape by breaking a wall. But right now I still have the endless jail escape key from the quest line that you're supposed to be doing here. So I was like, okay, I'll mess around with that. I tried talking to a guard, and they want me to like pay them a bunch of money, which I don't have much of. I don't think I could even have afforded it. So I was kind of considering what I should do. You know, I'm jangling this thing. I'm not really sure what I'm supposed to do. I was nervous at this point because, again, the lack of saves makes it a big problem. If I could have saved beforehand, I probably would have just reloaded. I think I do try to escape this like that, but I realize I'm still in prison. So I'm like, okay, I'll do a prison break. Let's see what happens, because the game's got kind of a weird system. I break out. Again, that guard clearly should have seen me. He doesn't say anything. Even though I run into this guard, I'm like, okay, they're not saying anything. I just greet this one. I engage conversation. Nothing. They don't care. Again, it's weird. They should have some system that tells them they're upset. Then they're randomly angry. They both kick me, and my health isn't recovering because, you know, I'm being thrown in prison, not resting. So I can take about one hit before I get KO'd. So I get thrown back in prison. So, okay, this isn't going so well. Now I know the guards can't be trusted. Even if they greet me 1 second, then they'll kick the crap out of me the next. So I start running. I get caught one more time. I'm trying to figure out, you know, how to talk to the person that's actually down here. And I realize I'm going to have to just escape. So I break out of prison because there is a pretty easy way to do that. It's kind of stupid. And I was looking in prison for my gear because obviously I don't have anything equipped. And I was like, okay, where's the chest that has my stuff? Well, they don't have that system. Instead, as soon as you break out, you just magically have all your stuff like back in your inventory, which is stupid in of itself. Representative of why this system doesn't work. So now I'm back out in the town and I wonder, okay, am I wanted? Will anybody really care? Some people are acting a little bit mean to me, but I don't know if that's just part of their basic scripted dialogue, and I still to this point don't know. Or if it's for some other reason. Everything seems okay though, and I'm like, okay, maybe if I just wander a little bit, I'll be all right. Maybe it's just that one area that's a problem. So I go to town. I think I go to rest. I'm doing pretty normal things. Everything seems to be fine until I go to talk to this girl that is involved, this little girl is involved in a quest. I walk over to her. All of a sudden, everyone's mad at me. The peasants of this town start beating the shit out of me. A little girl starts to try and kill me, and I'm like, well, I don't want to kill a little girl. So I run away. All the civilians are mad, and I know that if civilians die, I could lose some quests. So I do the sensible thing and start running. Meanwhile, guards aren't reacting, so I have the civilian populace willing to murder me for whatever reason, but the guards that should be mad at me aren't, so even more confusing. I go talk to another guard. Again, they're still kind of inconsistent. They'll talk to me and then they'll decide, oh, I'm gonna fight. So I decide to skip town for a bit, and thankfully that eventually does clear out all that random aggro. I believe part of it was that I got arrested a few times in a row because I was trying to find my missing gear and got beat up. But yeah, I just found that whole system to be very frustrating, and just very nonsensical. Like, why would civilians randomly know that I was jailbroken? Like, how would they even know? I didn't do anything to them. And I've not yet had a problem with looting other people's chests in their homes or even in other palaces or other cities, so I really don't know what caused that strange system there. I just think it's just very poorly set up. They never really explain like disguises or anything like that either. So I don't know. Thankfully it did resolve itself. Nothing got ruined in my game file there, and I was able to do all the other quests normally. And you know, I tried a few things. One thing I did was I bought a few rounds at the tavern, because that like buys it for everybody in the area. And I was like, if there's an affinity system, maybe that'll help if I buy everyone some beer. But I can't really say for sure what happened there. And I know this is a bit long-winded, but I think it's important to bring up, because I think that aspect of the game is just, there's a lot of that, and it's really the weakest point. Now, once you get to endgame, I think things start to change a bit more. And I think the problem is that even the fun part, which is exploring and fighting enemies, it starts to become a little bit less fun, because you're just able to just destroy things pretty quickly. So let's go to this. I have an encounter with 2 ogres, you'll see, or 2 cyclopses, you'll see what I mean. So even though this is a pretty good encounter in terms of like actually having a number of enemies there, once you're strong enough, there's usually a way that you can kind of clown the encounter. So with warrior, you just stagger things endlessly. I did one move there and I was able to stagger both those guys pretty easily, and then I can make them knock down. And while it is very satisfying, things just die a bit too quickly like that. There are still some good things that they add, like armor that takes, you know, a little bit to break through. I think more enemies need things like that to make them challenging, so you know, actually have to look for proper areas to aim, or charge up your attacks properly, or aim for the right spots. I like that as a warrior. I can break those spots after, you know, big heavy blows. It makes sense. But my weaker blows bouncing off of it also makes sense, and I think that's good. The problem I find with the late game is that you want to be a class that's good at something as opposed to being more generalist. That's not to say you can't make a generalist class work, because I know like something like a fighter can still be useful, because they do have, you know, some parries and some cool things they can do. But why be a fighter if you can be a warrior and knock over enemies and just completely invalidate them? Being a fighter, you have a harder time. Even against dragons at a higher level, as a fighter, breaking the heart is a lot harder. Your attacks don't cause a drake to stagger as easily. Meanwhile, with a warrior, I do that leaping poke once, and you know, the dragon or the drake falls over, and I can just go crazy on it, and it becomes almost not even an encounter. Other classes like the Mystic Spearhand can completely ignore challenging encounters, which I have some footage of over here. Because this was when drakes were a little bit hard for me. I ran to this higher level area in order to unlock a few things. I wanted to get Warfarer a little bit earlier, and I wanted to get some armor that I knew was over here. Now, with Mystic Spearhand, their design's a little bit interesting. One of your things lets you slow enemies down for a few seconds, which is very powerful as a defensive. And then the other thing you have that just completely breaks the game is a shield, which applies to your allies in a decent range around you. It lasts a few seconds, and it makes you completely immune to any damage for those seconds. It has a little bit of a stamina cost, but not enough of one where you can't just spam it, or you can't just time it for reasonable things, like whenever the dragon launches itself up and slams down, instead of watching your pawns all fly around, you can just put the shield up and completely stop that. Pretty easy. As a warrior, now I can just kill the heart and make the dragon stagger out of doing anything. But as a Mystic Spear Hand, even against enemies that I wasn't really of level of, it was just easy. Just keep putting a shield up whenever there's a dangerous attack, negate those things, do a few, basic hits, and there you go. Even the slowdown thing wasn't really necessary because, I mean, why do I even need to slow the enemy down if I can just be invincible to its attacks? Why waste the stamina and time on that? Spear Hand also has the nice benefit of having an answer to everything. They have physical and magical damage. They have an attack you can charge up which you can pinpoint onto a weak point and, cause an enemy to stagger. So I find Spear Hand to be one of the better classes if you want to be able to just do anything in the game. Although I just felt it wasn't as fun as being a warrior. I might play it some more later though, because I do kind of like some of the ideas behind it. But regardless, I just wanted to show, like, you just kind of ignore things. Now, let's talk a little bit about what I do think the real problems of this game are, aside from the questing, because that's, it's easy enough to ignore that. There's a lot of fun things to see. The main focus isn't on questing, it's on exploring and fighting cool enemies. Like I have up on the screen right now is me as a thief when I was first trying out Thief, so I don't have like a ton of great skills yet, but me fighting a Lich, which was a cool encounter, and I got to see some of the nice things that my Thief could do. What I think happens is, high level, you're just too powerful. Nothing really bothers you much. It might like pester you, like harpies might pick you up or throw your pawns off a cliff, or something stupid might happen because you're trying to ignore some stuff, but you're not really getting anything too interesting going on. I think the problem is we need more elites. We need more density of them. We need more combinations. Like let's say like a Lich and a Chimera together would be a really cool fight. Or like a Lich with more skeletons around. There should be some way to encourage you to have those AoE skills, those parry skills, those defensive skills, but also those focused offensive ones. I also feel like there's just too many battles where you can solve it a little bit too easily without needing variety in your builds. Like, most enemies, you just need some form of magic in order to counter their resistances to physical, if they have a resistance to physical, which means almost anything counts. Or Mystic Spear Hand, just doing whatever will just instantly clown it. It's very rare to find a lot of dangerous enemies that aren't resistant to that are resistant to physical, I should say. There's slimes, but they're just a basic enemy, and then any spell just sets them off. It's not like you're not going to kill them by stabbing them or warrior smashing them, even if you're a super high level warrior, which is good, but we need some more big elites that do things, like a gelatinous cube or something. I think stealing a few enemies from D&D would be really smart. Having enemies that can do these more impactful moves is also important. There should be some things that just completely obliterate you at level 20, but there weren't enough of those, so I do think that is something that is kind of a problem. There are some cool places though, like this one. It's not a part of a quest, but it's a nice little cave where you find like this experimental stuff. You find like a mage robe and a tome, and then there's a Lich there. It's like, okay, there's some environmental storytelling going on there, and there's a Chimera in another room nearby, which is pretty neat. Now, let's briefly talk about classes, just so you guys know, and because I bothered experimenting with so many of them, I might as well talk about them, and then we can, finish up this talk about the game. Let me put on a different fight. So that was me as a thief versus a Lich. Let's do me. Let's see. I don't want to do a political intrigue video. You know what? I'm going to play this in the background because I had to suffer. You get to suffer a little bit too. 48 minutes of me running around town doing nothing while I talk about this next part. So, classes. Mostly, they all do feel good. They all have something going on. Ranged in particular, I think, has really powerful options because you can pretty much solve any problem if you can shoot at it or cast a spell at it. But I do think that they lack some of the fun punch that melee gets. And by that I mean they don't have as many mechanics that really interact as you're doing something. You know, you're not doing like a timed attack like Warrior does, where you can speed up your blows if you do it well enough. You don't have like a charged up attack that's worth anything. You can levitate, but you can only levitate for such a short period of time. You can't really cast anything effectively while you're in the air, except for your basic attacks, which as a mage or sorcerer just suck. So they don't really give you enough to have a fun time, let's say like as a mage or sorcerer with just general combat. Yes, you can call some cool spells out, and sometimes that feels good, but I think you have a problem of either you're completely demolishing the enemy in like 1 or 2 hits, or you feel like you're doing nothing. And that's not so fun, and it doesn't interact with one of the main fun things about the game, which is like, you know, being able to climb all over enemies, knock them over, and do all that kind of stuff. I think that's kind of like a bit of a shame. But still, like, at least they're very effective at everything you're going to do. Magic Archer in particular has pretty much a solution to everything, where, you know, they have auto tracking arrows and arrows that heal, arrows that burn, or like you have elemental things. It's pretty cool. I think Fighter is balanced, but it's just a bit too weak at everything to really feel like you're in control the same way other classes are. Higher level, that might be a little bit different, but I don't think that it's really like enough where I had a great time as Fighter. It just has really boring skills too, like, oh, here's a circular slash, here's a jump slash, here's a you know, here's a counter, here's a shield smack. While those things can sometimes be kind of neat, I kind of wish there was something a little bit more advanced that went into them. Especially when it's just like, well, why not just be Warrior, who gets those same things, but when Warrior does them, you know, a Cyclops will get knocked over. When you do it as a fighter, it's like, okay, you did some damage, and that's about it. Well, at that point, you should just be a thief, because a thief does more critical damage, climbs on things better, attacks way faster. It probably has better defensives because it has one skill, the Meister skill, Formless Feint, which just makes you literally invulnerable at a small stamina drain because you auto-dodge everything. Or you can just dodge yourself, which is really quick and gives you iframes, which I feel is more effective than the Fighter Shield, which only works from right in front of it. And, you know, the parry timing on it isn't like super easy or super worthwhile, that I saw at least. I might need to experiment with it more, but I do feel like Fighter felt a bit lackluster compared to others. I think Thief might be my favorite, because it's got enough busted skills, but enough cool skills too. Like, you can plunder things from enemies. You can drop a smoke screen, get auto crits on them, or like you grab the enemy, throw them on the floor, and just instantly kill them, even if it's a really annoying defensive enemy that's smaller. Or you can climb up on an enemy, drop a smoke bomb, and get your critical attacks off like that, which is kind of cool. You can also steal from enemies, and you can steal things like fairy stones from certain creatures, usually boss elites. But if you find those and you drop a smoke bomb and you use plunder, you're getting one of the most precious resources, and you can just get a ton of it while still doing lots of damage, while still having your cool jump attack where you can eviscerate things and being able to just auto dodge everything. I think Thief is really one of the more fun to play if you like that melee stuff. Spear Hand is good at everything. It's got physical and magical damage, so nothing you run into will be immune to you. It has one of the most broken abilities in the game, which kind of ruins the game, which is this magic shield, which I mentioned before, which I also think ruins its own gameplay because you're just doing maintenance buffs constantly. I didn't really love that part of it, but it also has really good skills like dashes and like a sort of a light parry, jump attack. It can do telekinesis, but again, because you're limited to 4 skills, you're probably going to pick the shield. You're probably going to pick the dash, which also gives you mobility and traversal options to get like hidden chests. If you're like me, you're probably going to pick the parry option because of course you're going to want that. And then I pick the big beam blast because that lets you hit weak spots and stagger things. So there's no real room to pick up the telekinesis ability or the one where you stop like projectile, which don't come your way that often anyways. So I don't know, I feel like Spear Hand has a lot of options, but since you're only able to use 4 options, it suffers a bit. Now this, leading into this, is where I think Mage and Sorcerer get screwed over the hardest. In Dragon's Dogma 1, you had more spell slots, so options of what skills you were going to have. Warrior was the only one that was super limited. I think there are some good things about the way they set it up now, but one of the things I really dislike is the way Mage and Sorcerer are limited. Because with Mage, you're going to probably want one affinity skill so you can grant yourself elemental powers, especially if you can grant it to your pawns or to, you know, to yourself, so your autos actually mean a little bit of something. It's kind of nice to have that. And then you're going to have high 11 for ranged enemies or just for anything else, and you're going to have a flamethrower. And then you might have the ice spell or something else. But it really doesn't give you a lot of play. With 4 skills, you can't really do enough variety in your spells to have an answer to everything. Or if you do have an answer to everything, you're giving up on some other things that just make maybe your basic play a little more fun, which I feel is a little frustrating. Not that great. At least you get a free heal spell as Mage, which is nice. With Sorcerer, I feel like you get really wrecked by the fact that instead of getting a nice heal, you get a stamina regen thing, which doesn't feel impactful because your stamina comes back pretty quickly to begin with. Most of the time you have a stamina problem, it's just you gotta stop and step away from the enemy for a little bit, and that's not really going to change much with that. So I don't really find that fun. The only thing that's really great about Sorcerer is you get some really busted damage abilities, and eventually you get the Meister ones, which are just insane and kind of make it kind of boring because you just kill everything in one hit, so not great. I played Ranger a bit. Again, they're what you'd expect from a Ranger. You can run and kick off of enemies and do some cool like trick shots. So there's very Legolas moments with that, just no sword. But hey, you got those moments, so it's pretty cool. Magic Archer, you have auto-targeting arrows and they shoot out and they like all launch at once, and you can imbue them with elements. You get one arrow you can fire, which is like explosive that you also control when it shoots out, like a Metal Gear Solid Nikita missile, which is cool. That kind of thing is really nice. So Magic Archer's great. Warfare is, I feel, okay. It solves the problem of needing like traversal options because you can just swap to a mage's weapon and be able to use its like levitate, and you can just swap to like a warrior's weapon and use the skills you want to use, or, you know, go to Mystic Spear. Like you can combine a few different things. The problem is you're only going to have 3 total usable skills aside, and your 4th is locked to being the one that switches between your weapons. The nice thing about Warfare is that all the weapons you have equipped, only the one you have currently equipped counts as weighted. So that means everything else you're carrying isn't heavy on you, which is good. It basically lets you do anything, so you could just switch to a bow and shoot a harpy out of the air and then switch back to whatever other weapon you have. So it's great if you are okay with just having 3 skills, but I feel like it's kind of boring at the same time. Like, the game's focus is supposed to be on having your pawns fill in your gaps, so to have Warfare just be like, oh, well, I can do everything on my own, because my pawns aren't doing it enough, I think is more of a problem. People who are selling its, like, you know, singing its praises, I think that's kind of revealing it's the game's issue, where the pawns really just, you just kind of wish you could set up like a certain conditions, like what if there is a flying enemy, use high 11. If there is an enemy weak to X, use Y. If I press go as a pawn command, warrior, use your springboard because I want you to do that. Like, if there were some things you could set up like that, I really think the value of Warfare would be much smaller, because you wouldn't need to solve some of the problems and just doing it yourself. So that's my issue with Warfare, and also it works better for certain classes than it does for others. Again, with Warrior, the big issue is that when you switch to the vocation of Warrior, your stats give you a lot of knockdown resist, which means you can sit there and charge up your attacks and not get interrupted constantly. But Warfare doesn't get that stat bonus, so you can't really play the way you might want to if you like Warrior, and I happen to like Warrior, so that's kind of an issue. Finally, pawns, like I mentioned, I think we need more control over them. That's kind of the problem with them, but otherwise, they do learn certain things. They do learn tactics, like if they see you throw an enemy off a cliff or stun an enemy and throw it, they will learn a bit from that, which is kind of like a nice part of that. I think that is kind of cool. Augments, I think the RPG element of augments sounds cool at first until you realize how weak some of the augments are. So if you are like me and you love to know the numbers behind things, I went to go look up the augments and I was like, wow, I can't believe how many of the ones I thought would be kind of interesting or I was excited about getting just suck. One in particular, it's awful, is the warrior capstone one. It costs a ton to get it. You have to get to max level warrior. And what it says is it reduces the loss gauge culmination. And if you're not sure what loss gauge is, well, if you look on the screen right now, you can see that my health, there's like a gray portion and then there's an empty portion away from the top. Basically what happens is as you get hit, you lose health, but you also lose your total max recoverable amount. So your total health will slowly decrease the more you get hit. This gets repaired if you camp or if you go rest somewhere, so you will get full health again after that. But the loss gauge basically is like, you know, your temporary permanent loss HP. On a warrior, you're not losing much loss gauge per hit because you're meant to kind of get hit here and there. So even like a big dragon claw is going to take a tiny portion out. Whereas if you're a thief or mage, you might be down to almost nothing pretty quickly because you're not meant to be getting hit. Well, I got this augment thinking, okay, reducing that sounds good, except it only reduces it by like 5%, which is nothing. So it's pretty much effectively worthless. Other things give you things like plus 50 attack, which at first, early game, it's worth it, but mid game, nope. Late game, definitely not. So really the only good augments were things that gave you some defense, and even then, those kind of still were kind of poor because they had some percentage increases. And then probably the other best ones are increasing your lantern light, which should tell you that that's not very exciting. That shouldn't be one of the ones you consider, but it is good. The stamina regen one is okay because, of course, carrying things is important. But probably by far the best one is the Warfarer one, which getting Warfarer takes a long time, or you have to kind of sneak around a specific area, which actually in this video is what I'm currently doing. Going through a dungeon you have to do in order to bypass a story progression point so you can get to there first. But Warfarer has one where basically your weight class is treated as, I think, one lower than what it currently is, which is big because the lower your weight class is, the less stamina drain you get from running, which you're going to be doing a lot of in this game because there's not fast travel. And then I think it also improves your stamina regen a little bit. But yeah, that's probably the best one by far, which is disappointing. You would hope for different builds and, you know, choices to matter, but they don't. I really think that's a big weakness. The augments should matter a little bit more. So what I think the game needs, and what I think it will get, is eventually with some DLC, hopefully we'll get something equivalent to the Bitter Black Isles. Hopefully we'll get something where there's some harder enemies, harder encounters, and maybe they could rebalance some of the augments a bit. I honestly do think they need to nerf some of the skills some of the classes have, particularly the Spear Hand Shield and the Thief Formless Feint are pretty egregiously good, and they're not necessary. I mean, Thief already has invulnerability on its dodge. Like, you can already do a lot with that, so I feel it's just kind of silly to like stack the deck so heavily to the point where even the character with a shield is less defensive, I think, than even the Spear Hand and the Thief. I'd even say Warrior probably feels more defensive than the guy with the shield because they can just eat the hits and it barely does anything to them. We do need more creature variety. I do feel like there's not really a good excuse for that. You know, playing other games, it's not like it's like that crazy hard to have different enemy types. I mean, I'm still working on playing Final Fantasy VII Rebirth, and you know, I noticed like every area there's different enemies that have different weaknesses, different things that, you know, that pressure them, or different things that like different ways they attack, and it's like, well, why can't this game add a few more? Like, I shouldn't be counting the elites on my, you know, on my hands and saying, oh, that's all there is. They really need to focus more on those. I don't mind the packs of enemies like some do. I think that's good for getting EXP and everything, but I do think they need to create some more purposeful encounters. Enemy placement is a real issue. Early in this clip, actually I have one moment where there is a good Dark Souls enemy placement moment, which not everyone loves the idea of that, but this one got me the first time I met it, where I jumped over this gap. But the first time I walked over there, that guy rolled out and threw me into this little open pit area, and I flew into the ground and just like took tons of damage there and almost died. That was a smart placement, and enemies aren't usually placed like that, where they're like hidden in a little cave that's explicitly just for tricking you a little bit if you're being careless, which is why I wasn't really being careful at all. But I think we need more things like that, maybe more interesting encounters where like a dungeon is centered around something unique the enemies do there. For example, you could have an enemy, like a bunch of goblins in a cave, and instead of just being the same old basic goblins that run at you, have these purposely playing with fire. So one covers you with pitch, and then they're throwing cocktails around with like fire. or they have like a fire-based enemy, or they have those slimes that are fire-based that can explode. So if you're not careful, they set off a chain reaction. And then maybe, you know, have some cool curated encounters. Like you get to the end of dungeons and there's something really awesome to fight there, like two elites in an arena like setup with some things around that you can throw and make involved. I think they need to have more of those in the late game area. Otherwise, though, I think the game is graphically beautiful. I think it's awesome that you can do things like grab a griffin, and as it tries to fly away, you can just like hold on and ride it a great distance. But I think the game does have some flaws besides the overblown MTX issue. If you're concerned about that, I mean, and you made this part of the video, I'm impressed. But the MTX thing isn't a big deal. They don't sell anything of any actual value there that you can't get in game. It's one of those weird Capcom things, which is the same thing they did with the RE4 remake, the same thing they did with Devil May Cry, where they had some weird things you could buy that anybody who plays the game will be like, why would you even do that? So I think that aspect of things is greatly exaggerated. I do think some performance issues are real, like the cities in particular were really bad on release, but otherwise not too terrible. But I do think the game does have some flaws, especially in the quest lines. I really do enjoy this game though. I recommend it if you're a fan of Dragon's Dogma 1 especially. But if you like what you've seen so far and what you've heard, it really is a good time, and the sense of adventure is really there. That's all I have to say on that. If you have any questions, I'd be willing to answer. Have a good night.